Hello party people and welcome to the bar. This is our home bar here in Las Vegas, and I was making myself a drink to do office hours, and then I just thought, well, why don't I do office hours here, so that if I get some really oddball question, I suppose I could load up my gin and tonic with more gin. I could call it a gin and tonic and gin, I suppose, at that point. So let's go through your top voted. Don't judge me by what's on here either, what's on the liquor brands or on the wines up on the display. We throw a lot of parties, so we cater to people with taste all over the place, so there's all kinds of variety in here. So let's see, the top voted question that y'all have from BullGab, MyTeaGotCold asks, can you name anyone who radically disagrees with you? After nearly 50 questions, I trust you too much and I want to hear from the dark side. Well, yeah, the comments. Like if you watch the TikTok videos, YouTube it's not as active with the comments, but TikTok, you'll often see comments from people who have opposing points of view. And I don't delete them unless they're personally insulting. You know, and I don't mean their opinions personally insulting. I mean that they personally attack me for something. Oh, you look stupid. But yeah, by all means, I encourage people to have a discussion in the comments. Now, is there someone in the database industry that radically disagrees with me? I don't think so, but you could say that some employees of Microsoft will frequently take disagreeing positions with me. They tend to not do it too publicly, though. You tend to want to catch them at conferences, and they'll be like, that Brent guy is no good. Next up, speaking of which, DataGuy says, next question, what are your thoughts on the Azure offerings of Postgres versus AWS? He says, obviously you prefer AWS, but is Microsoft really that far behind? I ask because we're locked into Azure and we're looking for opportunities to save on licensing. I think that AWS Aurora Postgres is miles ahead of Azure's offerings, but that's only specifically Aurora. And if you search on my blog for AWS Aurora, I've got information on there about how we architected constant care atop of AWS serverless, how it works, things like that. But really, if you don't pick a cloud provider based on where it's at with one specific database at one point in time. You pick a cloud provider because they line up better with you architecturally, and then you just don't have a choice. You've got to ride with that cloud vendor. There will be times when other cloud vendors are ahead on specific offerings, but you just overall hope that it's a better partner. Next up, does time really exist? Asks, do you have experience working with TimescaleDB? Nope, not at all. Next question. Yusuf says, do you foresee any issues granting show plan permissions to a dev user so they can tune their queries for the production SQL VM? Technically, if the query has personally identifiable information in it, if it has things like social security numbers or confidential information that you wouldn't want to show in production, that can get a little sketchy. If you search for Brent Ozar, how PII gets around, I've got a blog post talking about how and demonstrating how you can see personally identifiable data in execution plans. So that's the place where I would start. Other than that, no, not at all. Other than that piece problem. Next up, Dopinder says, will DBAs and software developers be replaced by AI in the next 5 years? How should they upskill to avoid obsolescence? Oh, I'm taking a drink for this one. For the last 20, 30 years, there have always been talking heads who say, well, you know, you better watch out for your jobs because technology is going to automate all of it. It's going to take it all away from you. AI is a tool, just like you're a tool, Dopinder. AI is a tool that people use in order to get things done. It is not a replacement for people. If you want to see where AI is probably going to knock people out first, Look at things that don't have a defined answer. Look at things where there's not exactly a right and wrong. And the easy example I'm going to give you is marketing copywriting. Marketing copywriting and translations is another one where AI is rapidly automating all kinds of jobs, but taking away the people who sucked at their job, people who are brilliant at copywriting, and I say because I use somebody for copywriting from time to time, people who are brilliant at copywriting still smoke AI. But if you can't afford to hire a person, it's hard to do better for quick, cheap copywriting than AI. Development and database administration is stuff that has a more correct answer at the end of it. Queries have to produce a specific result. Databases can't be corrupt. They need to be reliable and need to fail over quickly and easily. AI is going to struggle with that for quite a long time. Next up, SportsFan101 says, hey Brent, you previously mentioned that the issue with open source is that when something breaks, there's no one to call. I've never worked with open source, he says, so what do IT teams do when they encounter an issue with an open source database? So there's kind of two tiers. If you're a small company, you can't afford to have a full-time staff who deeply understands that database. So you'll contract with another larger remote database administration firm who does that for you. There are plenty of DBA as a service firms who specialize in that kind of work. Those DBA as a service firms will have lots of people on staff, including very senior engineers who know how to, for example, read the database source code in order to get to the root cause of a problem. That's how small to mid-sized businesses do it. Large businesses tend to have enough databases and enough problems that they can afford to have enough database administrators on staff full time to do that level of support. And they know where to escalate for questions inside, for example, the Postgres mailing lists. So that's how companies do it. But yeah, it's very common to see support contracts. Next up, Mola says, how should we handle sending of emails from SQL Server so that recipients know why they are receiving an email and can opt out? You don't. You don't do that. You don't send customer-facing emails from SQL Server. You send them from the app tier. Just because SQL Server can do something does not mean you should do it with SQL Server, and sending customer-facing public emails is a great example of that. There is almost no troubleshooting. There's difficult retries. There's no queue management or anything like that built into SQL Server. Do that in the app tier, period. Next up, Mr. SqlSeeks says, there's a performance issue caused by a new plan being generated. I have no idea why a different plan was built. I've done days of research. I've restructured the code. Now it performs in all scenarios. Is it ever okay to stop looking for the root cause just because you were able to fix it and you spent days on research already? That's a great question, and it's something that clients will ask me from time to time. From time to time, we'll fix a problem with a query and they'll say, well, can we dig further into why the old one was slow? Sure, but before we dig further, I just like to stop and say, here's how much time we've used so far, and here's what my billable rate is. Would you like to continue? Or is there something else you'd like to have me look at given that spend? For example, with me, it's let's say X dollars a day. Do you want to go down another day or two of root cause analysis for another X $1,000? Or would you rather have me focus on some other problem? And people in your organization will, every time, they'll say, you know what, stop going down that rat hole. We got lots of other problems to take care of. Framing it for, would you rather have me spend time here versus would you rather go on to the next problem, and here's what the next problem is, helps businesses stay focused on the big picture. Next up, Buttercup says, Azure Marketplace's image installed SQL Server with master and system databases on the C drive. Do you have a recommended way to relocate, or do we just need to suck it up? So yeah, if you Google for how to move the system databases, there are tons of posts. Microsoft has one. Microsoft has a knowledge base article on how to move the system databases. So do that. Next up, Nick asks, what should you be aware of when creating a database with an enterprise level amount of tables? Nick, could you be more vague? I know enterprises that have one table in their entire database because they're using the entity attribute value problem. Nick, what the Sam? What does that even mean? Going on to the next question. Rob DBA asks, hi Brent, I'm working more as an application DBA, and I'm wondering what points or methods do you apply to determine that a query is too far gone? E.g., I've got 88 joins to some large tables where it's doing heavy logic in the database that can't change. How do I tell the developers to rewrite it? Great question. So when someone brings me a query and they say, I want it to go faster, I ask two questions. One is, how long do you want me to spend working on this? 1 hour, 1 day, or 1 week? Because you can't just give people open-ended questions. How long do you want me to spend? They're like, as long as it takes. I'm like, all right, what do you want me to cap at? 1 hour, 1 day, or 1 week? And sometimes your manager is bringing you a query that is like 88 joins because they do want you to rewrite it. And they're like, it's probably going to take a week. This thing's a monster. Go ahead and do it. I authorize that. Or maybe a day and I see how far I get. Then the second question that I ask is, do you expect, or what are you going to be happy with? A percentage improvement or an order of magnitude improvement? Meaning, all you want is like 5 to 10 or 20% faster, or are you looking for 10x or 100x faster? Now you see how those two answers are going to help you understand where you're at. If management comes to you with an 88 join query and they say, well, just spend an hour on it and we need it to go 10x faster, you can say, you know what, I'll give it my best shot in an hour. And at the end of the hour, you can go, I was not able to achieve that objective. And based on my times here, I think it would take days in order to achieve that objective of like 10x faster. When you have enough credibility with management, you can look at that and go, you know what, I know from looking at this query that it's going to take me at least a day, if not a week, to get to 10x faster. Is that something you want to pursue? And then they can decide whether or not they want to do the rewrite or not. So again, those two questions, how long do you want me to spend? And I just give them options of an hour, a day, or a week. And if they want to micromanage and say 4 hours, that's totally fine. Just give me some rough idea there. And then do you want a percentage improvement or an order of magnitude improvement? And that'll do it. Let's see here. Midlife DBA says, hi Brent, have you had any experience with hold on a second here. It's not, my phone went to sleep, so now I got to go back and reload PollGab. Just a second here. There we go. Okay, so Midlife, no, it's still not going. There it goes. So Midlife DBA asks, hi Brent, have you had any experience with customers that use backup and recovery solutions like Rubrik or Cohesity? Yes. Any pros and cons you would be willing to share? As the great Eric Clapton sang, it's great as a stretch because the guy's a total slime ball. Now that I think about that, I shouldn't use the term great next to his name. Is the great guitarist. How about that? Has the great guitarist and great Ferrari collector, he is, Eric Clapton, sang, it's in the way that you use it. From a soundtrack of The Color of Money with Paul Newman and Tom Cruise. It's a great movie and a wonderful soundtrack. It's all about how you use the tools. They're just tools. I often think of myself as a carpenter with a bunch of tools laid out in front of me. If you try to get 0 recovery point objective and 0 recovery time objective with a 10 terabyte database, as one of my clients recently did with a tool like Rubrik or Cohesity, you will have a really bad time. Horses for courses, but it's all about the problem you're trying to solve. Next up, Mailbox asks, is SQL Server a good place to build a data lake? Do you have any recommendations for database management tools that are designed for data lakes and offer good product support? When you're building a data lake, you don't want to pay fixed licensing that sits around idle most of the time and doesn't do anything. So with SQL Server, with Oracle, you're going to be paying a fixed licensing amount for a long period of time. What you really want instead for things like data lakes is pay for the amount of querying that you do. And you want to be able to disconnect your compute costs from your storage costs. So that's where you go in and start to look at cloud native data warehouses. And right about now you're going to be going, or cloud native data lake tools. Right about now you're going to be going, but Brent, we're on premises. Well, in that case, some of them like Snowflake, for example, will offer on-premises versions. I'm pretty sure Snowflake still does. But I would much rather go more towards the cloud where you can get a relatively infinite amount of compute relatively quickly, which is something that you can't do with a traditional database management system. The whole idea with data lakes is that you're going to dump 30 years, 50 years worth of history on there, wildly, I was going to say wildly unstructured, but that's not fair, partially structured. And you're going to have some analyst walk in and ask a random question in there and is willing to whip out the company credit card to get that question answered. And maybe they want it very quickly. They can pay a large amount of money. Maybe they want it really slowly. They can pay a small amount of money. But those kinds of options are what you don't get with a database management system. Don't think about data lakes being a database. They're not. They're a pile of files. Delicious. Next up, great, Vishnu asks, how good is your internet when you're on a cruise ship? Is it good enough to do day-to-day work? It depends so much on the cruise ship and where you're at. We were in Alaska on the Norwegian Jewel, and it was constant overcast, really thick skies. The internet was garbage. It wasn't good enough to do email or a text. But then I've also been on ships that had not good enough to do a video call, but good enough where you could totally get your work done. Not good enough to do remote desktop either, but Virgin cruises have Starlink, and the internet is better over there, but still it isn't something that I would want to guarantee to my boss that I'm going to be able to be in meetings, for example. Garth asks, what are your favorite 1980s TV shows? Oh, that's easy. Miami Vice. Not even close. I adored Miami Vice. I have vivid memories of when I went to high school, which was in the late 80s, early 90s. Going to high school, every morning I would watch 2 episodes of Miami Vice every single morning because I had them all on videotape. Loved Miami Vice. So much good about that. And then we'll do one more. Let's scroll through and find something interesting. Thomas Dolby asks, what's your opinion of the Azure feedback site used for SQL Server enhancements? Microsoft seems to advocate it on LinkedIn. Well, it's the only site we have. So if you want to use it, or if you want to submit feedback to Microsoft, that's the only game in town. You could try to use something else, but Microsoft ain't listening. I could argue that they're not really listening to Azure feedback either, because the top 10 feedback voted requests, they're always like, upvote it, tell your friends, upvote the answers that you care about the most, and we'll listen to those. Go look at the top 10 most upvoted requests. They're not done. And they haven't been done for years. I get that it's really hard for Microsoft because they have an avalanche of, I want a pony type requests. Everybody wants a free pony, and they don't prove a business need for it. But even for the top 10 stuff, where there is a clear business need and people have laid it out in black and white, Microsoft's not doing it. So I'm not terribly thrilled with that. All right, well, there we go. That's perfect timing. My gin and tonic is just about done. The ice cube is dwindling down. The gin for today was Hendrick's Grand Cabaret, which I like quite a bit. It's kind of fruity and sweet, just like me. So I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios.